Ezekiel 33:3.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wednesday Bible Studies. Today we'll be doing Exodus chapters 13 to 15. So we'll go through Exodus. We'll take a look at Exodus chapters 13 to 15. We'll just do a little bit of a recap just to kind of figure out where we are and look at the plagues that have passed. And then afterwards, we'll do questions from the study and look at our reading from next week. Exodus 1 to 8 to 11. Then a new king who did not know Joseph came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to the people, the Israelites have become too numerous and too powerful for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase even more. And if a war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So the Egyptians appointed taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. As a result, they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. So after the death of Joseph, several generations passed, and then we can see that the favor of the Israelites has fallen. And now with this new king, we see that they're basically slaves. They're building these different cities for storehouses. So there was actually 3 cities. The third city we found in our previous study, which was the city of On, also known as Heliopolis. This city was listed in the Greek Septuagint. Exodus 1:15 to 16. Then the new king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you help the Hebrew women give birth, observe them on the birth stools. If a child is a son, kill him. But if it is a daughter, let her live. We know that didn't happen. We know that the women actually rebelled against the Pharaoh and were rewarded with their own families. But this led to the birth of Moses. And Moses was eventually placed in water by his mother, and he was a Levite. And we see Moses and Aaron together in these chapters we're covering in Exodus so far. The mother of Moses was Jochebed, and Jochebed has the name Yahweh in it, which means that the name Yahweh was actually in Jochebed's name prior to Exodus 3:14. So Moses' mother knew the name of God, but the Ea Asher Ea name given in Exodus 3:14, she did not know. Exodus 2 and 23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and with Jacob. And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So this was a covenant that was made with their ancestors, and here God is recognizing that he had made this covenant, and he's going to action on this covenant. And this is actually in Exodus 3, we see Moses come on the scene and then end up going back to Egypt after getting the name of God. So Moses was to be God to Pharaoh and Aaron as prophets. So in these early chapters of Exodus, we see Pharaoh being approached by Moses and Aaron. Aaron was present because, of course, Moses couldn't speak as well, so he wanted Aaron to be with him. And so basically Aaron acted as the prophet and Moses acted like God, and they would perform these different miracles through the power of the Lord. We had the first plague, which was blood in the river Nile. The second plague, which was an infestation of frogs. The third plague, which were swarms of gnats or lice, as we've translated. The fourth plague, masses of flies or insects. The fifth plague was the death of all livestock. The sixth plague, disease or boils. The seventh plague, storm and giant hail. The eighth plague was the plague of locusts. The ninth plague, the plague of darkness. And the final plague, the 10th plague, was the death of firstborn sons. We saw that there was a pattern where we would see the Pharaoh's heart become hardened and then softened and hardened. And typically when the Pharaoh's heart became softened, it was just temporarily until his problem went away. And then when his problem was gone, he once again would basically go back on what he had said. So he had to find that he had sinned. And then you would see another calamity. So this pattern went on up until the death of the firstborn, and the magicians were able to keep up with the first 2 signs or miracles that were shown through Moses and Aaron. However, after the frogs, they had tapped out. We're going to start our overview now of Exodus chapters 13 to 15, starting with Exodus 13. In Exodus 12:29-30, it reads, Now at midnight the Lord struck down every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon, as well as all the firstborn among the livestock. During the night Pharaoh got up, he and all his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud wailing in Egypt, for there was no house without someone dead. And this marks the beginning of the Exodus from Egypt. So the Exodus from Egypt happened in the middle of the night. Exodus 13:3. So Moses told the people, Remember this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. For the Lord brought you out by the strength of his hand, and nothing leavened shall be eaten. Today in the month of Abib you are leaving. So we know that the Exodus happened during the month of Abib. When is the month of Abib? The month of Abib is also known as the month of Nisan. So on the newer calendars, you'll see Nisan. On older calendars, you'll see Abib. Basically, after the Babylonian captivity, they picked up this word Nisan. So Nisan, Abib, the same thing. It's just basically a mark in time in regards to when they used which name. And this is corresponding to March, April, approximately. These are actually major holy days, the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread is the first day, which is also known as the Passover. It's the same thing. And then this goes on for 7 days, and this is in the month of Nisan. So Passover, 14th of Abib at twilight. This is when they would be sacrificing their lamb. This is coming from Exodus 12:6. And then the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the 14th of Abib to the 21st of Abib. You can check that in Exodus 12:18. The 10th of Abib, every household was to select a lamb. The 14th of Abib at twilight, the lamb was to be sacrificed with the congregation. The Exodus was during the start of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. As a matter of fact, in Exodus 12:33-36, you can see it. And in order to send them out of the land quickly, the Egyptians urged the people on. For otherwise, they said, we are all going to die. Keep in mind, they just saw the firstborns die. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, carrying it on their shoulders in kneading bowls wrapped in clothing. So they were in a hurry to get out of Egypt because the Egyptians were ushering them out after the firstborn had died. So in the middle of the night, they're leaving with all their stuff, but they're not really bringing many provisions. As a matter of fact, we find out that this bread that they're carrying was all they brought in regards to food. So they ate the unleavened bread as they camped at their first location. Exodus 12:26. When your children ask you, what does this service mean to you? And the service we're talking about is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You are to reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck down the Egyptians and spared their homes. So remember, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread is the Passover. Then we looked at the dedication of the firstborn. Exodus 12:37. Then the Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me every firstborn male. The firstborn from every womb among the Israelites belong to me, both of man and beast. Later, we see firstborn sons given to Levite priests. This will actually come up later in the book of Numbers. Once they have a priesthood, we see the firstborn of every womb, whether man or beast, that is offered to the Lord belongs to you. But you must surely redeem every firstborn son and every firstborn male of unclean animals. So the conversation here is between the Lord and Aaron is the high priest. So later we can see these dedications of animals and dedications of firstborns that were initially to the Lord. Now they're going towards the priests, and the priests are serving the Lord, and I'll show you the reason why shortly. So what was meant by redemption? We had some interesting lines talking about a donkey and how the donkey had to be redeemed, and then also Israelite firstborn sons had to be redeemed. What is this redemption about? Exodus 13:13, you must redeem every firstborn donkey with a lamb, and if you don't redeem it, you are to break its neck. And every firstborn of your sons you must redeem. So what's going on here? Why does the donkey need to be redeemed by sacrificing a lamb? Because that's what's being implied here. What they're saying is basically when a donkey is born, if it's the firstborn from the womb of that animal, that donkey can't be sacrificed. Instead, a lamb would have to be sacrificed in its place, or the donkey's neck is broken. Why? Leviticus 27:11. Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, these are the creatures which you may eat from all the animals on the earth. Whatever divides a hoof, thus making split hooves, and chews the cud among the animals, that you may eat. Nevertheless, you are not to eat of these among those which chew the cud, or among those which divide the hoof, the camel, for it chews the cud, it does not divide the hoof. It is unclean to you. So if you understand the description going on here, cud, we're talking about chewing lawn pretty much. But when we're talking about chewing the cud, that's one of the qualities of an animal that was clean. So if you take a look and you see that the hoof is split and you see that it chews the cud, it was an animal that would be clean. Would a donkey fit in that category? No. The reason? Donkeys, they don't chew the cud. Horses and donkeys and mules are herbivores, but they don't chew on the cud. So donkeys are unclean. They don't chew cud. You can't sacrifice an animal that is unclean to the Lord. Pig as well. Leviticus 27:11 makes it even more clear. Donkeys are unfit for sacrifice. So if you promise me a donkey, you must bring it to the priest and let him determine its value. You can't take unclean animals and put them on an altar and slaughter them. They can't be given to God as an offering. They're unclean. As a matter of fact, in the book of Maccabees, we see that they slaughtered a pig on the altar in the most holy place, and that was an abomination. Which firstborn animals did not need to be redeemed? Now you can imagine you couldn't have every animal be redeemed, because if you have an animal that's the redeemer, then you have one that's redeemed. You have to have some animals that you can redeem and then some animals that are redeemers. Obviously, the equation wouldn't work any other way. So in Numbers 18:17, it says, but you must not redeem the firstborn of an ox, a sheep, or a goat. They are holy. So then these would be the animals you would use to redeem the animals that are unclean. You are to sprinkle their blood on the altar and burn their fat as an offering made by fire, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So details behind redemption. All firstborn males, both man and beast, were dedicated to the Lord. Firstborn sons were dedicated for temple service with the Levites unless the redemption price was paid by the parents of that family. Firstborn donkeys or any unclean animal needed to be either redeemed or killed. Now here's the reason. Donkeys were unclean animals, but they're valuable work animals, and they needed to be redeemed by an animal such as a lamb because they were unclean. Therefore, they could not be used for a sacrifice. Since a donkey was more expensive than a lamb, it made sense to sacrifice a less costly animal. But if the firstborn donkey was not redeemed, it needed to be killed. And so what you're doing here is basically you're sacrificing one animal to make an unclean animal, the firstborn unclean animal, all right for use, because otherwise they had to kill it. So of course, a lamb being cheaper than a donkey, it was obviously a lot easier to do away with a lamb than it was to break the neck of a donkey. So in other words, if there wasn't a lamb to be sacrificed, they'd have to kill the donkey. So they'd have to break its neck. So the question becomes, why break the donkey's neck? Like, isn't there another way you could kill the donkey? The other animals were being slaughtered. Blood spilling on the ground would be a sacrifice. Breaking the neck would kill the animal without causing blood to touch the ground. If you notice, whenever they would do their sacrifices, the pagans would put blood on the ground, and you would see altars set up amongst the Israelites, the Levites, and they would put blood on the altar. They can't have blood spilling on the ground or on the altar, otherwise that would be a form of a sacrifice. Exodus 13:14. In the future, when your son asks you, what does this mean? You are to tell him, with a mighty hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the firstborn male of every womb, but I redeem all the firstborn of my sons. So it shall serve as a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead. For with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. I'll point something out. In regards to the firstborn son had to have an animal sacrificed. The unclean animal had to have an animal sacrificed. So in other words, when you looked at the firstborn sons, they're being compared to unclean. Why would that be? Well, look, the people were coming out of Egypt, and in Egypt, they had learned to worship other gods, and they had learned these different rituals and traditions and things that were completely apostate from the God of the Bible. And so really what you're noticing here is people are literally being compared to donkeys. In other words, when you look at the Israelites and how stubborn they are, it's the stubbornness of a mule. And so, of course, the comparison here is the unclean animal is just like the firstborn son, because the firstborn son is also unclean. So it's the idea that you take the firstborn and you know that they're unclean because they're living in a world that's sinful. They're born into sin. And then you purify the firstborn and then you dedicate them towards God. And we're going to see a little bit more shortly. So the Passover feast of unleavened bread used as a sign. Exodus 13:9. This was the last part we just read in the previous verse where it says, "So it shall serve as a sign on your hand and a symbol for your forehead." So it says here in Exodus 13:9, it shall be for you as a sign on your hand and a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. Exodus 13:16, it shall be a mark on your hand or the frontlets between your eyes. For by a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. So we can see twice here in Exodus 13, it's the same symbolism of a mark on the hand and a mark between the eyes. And you notice in Exodus 13:9, it says that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. Now, there's no law of the Lord yet. At least there's no 10 commandments. That comes later. But you can tell here that there's a connection between the Passover feast of unleavened bread, the law of the Lord, which has yet to be revealed, and this being a sign that's marking both the hand and the head. Well, that puts us to the book of Revelation, Revelation 7:1-3. I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, having the seal of the living God. And he called with a loud voice to the four angels who had been given the power to damage the earth and sea, saying, "Do not damage the earth or the sea or the trees until we have marked the servants of our God with a seal on their foreheads." Is this the same seal that we're talking about all the way back in Exodus? Revelation 9:4. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. Again, what is the seal of God? The Passover is the seal of God? Is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, is that the seal of God? Is that what was being communicated? Deuteronomy 6:6. These words I am commanding you today are to be upon your hearts, and you shall teach them diligently to your children and speak of them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as reminders on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. So in Deuteronomy, what we're talking about here is the 10 Commandments. Keeping the 10 Commandments is the seal of God. Keeping the Passover was a commandment. Exodus 12:14. And this day will be a memorial for you, and you are to celebrate it as a feast to the Lord, as a permanent statute for the generations to come. For 7 days you will eat unleavened bread. On the first day you are to remove the leaven from your houses. Whoever eats anything leavened from the first day through the seventh must be cut off from Israel. It is a permanent statute for generations to come. This is actually one of the earliest commandments that they had heard since they were together with Moses. So according to the Bible, we are to keep 6 holy days forever. If you check, you'll find that the major holy days are Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Feast of First Fruits, Feast of Weeks, also known as Pentecost, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Feast of Tabernacles, also known as Feast of Booths or Sukkot. Now, 6 of these, the ones that are in yellow, they were all commanded to be kept forever. The one that was not was the Feast of Trumpets. So the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, these were holy days that were to be observed for all generations. So if you're looking at the 10 Commandments and you're looking at Revelations and making the comparison between Exodus and Deuteronomy and Revelation, you're going to notice that the 10 Commandments are the seal of God that you're seeing in the book of Revelation. That's why I get really perplexed when people tell me the law has been done away with. It's their misunderstanding of what it means to be saved by grace through faith. They're misunderstanding what's going on in Romans and Galatians. Yes, we are saved by grace through faith. However, we are to keep the law. If we love Christ, we are to keep the law. We learn about the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. Exodus 13:21. And the Lord went out before them in a pillar of cloud to guide their way by day, and in a pillar of fire to give them light by night. so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place before the people. Returning the body of Joseph. Genesis 50:25. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. But then we see in Exodus 13:19, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, because Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear a solemn oath when he said, God will surely attend to you, and then you must carry my bones with you from this place. Exodus 13 overview. The Lord told Moses to consecrate all the firstborn male children to him. Whatever was first from the womb, man or beast, was to be dedicated to him. Moses told the Israelites to remember the Feast of Unleavened Bread as the day in which they came out of Egypt from slavery in the month of Abib. For 7 days, the Israelites were to eat unleavened bread, finished with a feast to the Lord on the seventh day. No leavened bread was to be eaten or seen anywhere in Israel. With a strong hand, the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt, and they are to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread from year to year as a sign on their hand or memorial between their eyes. Remember, this is part of the law. Every firstborn male animal was to be sacrificed, or if a son was to be redeemed. Every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. All firstborn animals were to be sacrificed or redeemed, and every firstborn male was to be redeemed. God did not lead the Israelites by the Philistines because he knew the Israelites would see war with the Philistines, then desire to return to Egypt. So he led them through the wilderness to the Red Sea. So leading them through the wilderness obviously wasn't the only option to get them to the land of Canaan. They could have just went towards the east. And I'll show you what their route is very shortly, because they really went towards the south along the edge of the sea, which made the route a lot longer. And the reason would be because if they had left Egypt and they had no possessions, and then they had seen the Egyptians and the Philistines and had to take on all that type of aggression, they probably would have just capitulated and went right back home. Moses took the bones of Joseph out of Egypt as the Israelites had sworn and moved from Succoth to Edom on the edge of the wilderness. The Lord went by night as a pillar of fire to provide light, and a pillar of cloud by day that did not depart from the people. Exodus 14. What was the path of the Exodus? So we know that the Israelites were in the land of Goshen. This is where we saw the whole family move in the times of Jacob moving with the other brothers. So basically, Joseph was living in Egypt at the time. He brought his family into the land of Goshen. So we're starting here looking at the land of Goshen because this is where the Israelites, the shepherders, were staying. Then we see in Exodus 12:37, the Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth with about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. So we go from Ramses to Succoth. Exodus 14:1 and 3. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. You are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite to Baal-zephon. For Pharaoh will say to the Israelites, they are wandering the land in confusion. The wilderness has boxed them in. Now, this is very interesting. We're going to talk about this later. There was a reason why God told them to turn back. Notice specifically, they're going backwards. They're not going from where they are forwards. They're literally going backwards, meaning they're going away from Canaan. 3 possible locations of Pi-hahiroth. So you have the north location up here, this middle location, and the lower location. There's discrepancies in regards to where this was, because Baal-zephon isn't somewhere we can necessarily find on a map. So these are the 3 points in which they think that the Israelites had went, either more towards the northeast or east, or a little bit down towards the south. The Pharaoh once again had his heart hardened by the Lord. Exodus 14:1 and 3. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds. Well, this happened several times. About them and said, what have we done? We have released Israel from serving us. So Pharaoh prepared his chariot and took his army with him. He took 600 of his best chariots and the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. Exodus 14, 1 and 3. And the angel of God who had gone before the camp of Israel withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from before them and stood behind them, so that it came between the camps of Egypt and Israel. The cloud was there in the darkness, but it lit up the night. And so all night long, neither camp went near each other. So the Egyptians had obviously pursued the Israelites. They had caught up to them. They got up to them when they were basically opposing Baal-Zephon, except they saw this pillar of fire and this pillar of cloud. And basically they stayed separate from them. Then later we see that Moses parts the sea and then closes it on the Egyptians. Exodus 14:30. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore. So we had a question in our last study, which was, well, what about the Pharaoh's body? Right here. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore. So their bodies washed on the shore. When Israel saw the great power that the Lord had exercised over the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and believed in him and in his servant Moses. So God hardened the heart of the Pharaoh to display his power through acts of judgment. And in Exodus 14:31, we see it worked. Exodus 14, the Lord told Moses to turn back and camp in front of Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea in front of Baal-Zephon, camped facing it. The Lord stated the Pharaoh's heart would be hardened and would pursue Israel, but the Lord would have glory over the Pharaoh and his host who would come to know that he was the Lord. The Pharaoh's mind changed towards Israel, and he questioned what he had done letting the Israelite servants go. The Pharaoh overtook Israel with his chariots, army, and horsemen, camped by the sea of Pi-Hahiroth in front of Baal-Zephon. As the Israelites saw the Pharaoh approaching, they grew fearful and accused Moses of taking them to die in the wilderness. But Moses assured them that the Lord would be their salvation and they would only need to be silent. The Lord told Moses to raise his staff over the Red Sea and divide it, so the Israelites could cross and the Pharaoh's heart would harden further and pursue them. The angel of God who was going before Israel went behind them. The pillar of cloud also went behind them, between the Israelites and Egypt, keeping the camp separated during the night. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the water back as an east wind during the night divided the waters. The Lord, operating from the pillars of fire and cloud, caused the Egyptian chariot wheels to clog, confound, so that their wheels drove heavy. So they were basically getting stuck in the mud. The Egyptians began to recognize in Exodus 14:25 that the Lord was fighting against the Egyptians. The Lord told Moses to stretch his hand over the sea and swept the Egyptians away in the water, leaving none to remain. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore, and Israel saw the great power in their Lord and believed him and his servant Moses, as well as the surrounding nations. Exodus 15. Exodus 15 is called the Song of Moses. This chapter is a song celebrating the victory over the Egyptians after crossing the sea. The work in Egypt was a success. Exodus 15:14-16. The peoples have heard, they tremble. Pangs have seized the inhabitants of Philistia. Now the chiefs of Edom dismayed. Trembling seizes leaders of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. Terror and dread fall upon them because of the greatness of your arm. They are still as stone till your people, O Lord, pass by. Till the people pass by whom you have purchased. So here we can see the surrounding nations, not just the Egyptians. These acts of judgment that you saw worked out in Egypt, this obviously caused a lot of intimidation for the surrounding nations. So as the Israelites were making their way and exodusing out of Egypt and then going into Canaan, the Canaanites feared them too. And you can see the language here was, till the people pass by whom you have purchased. So we're talking about the Lord purchasing. Well, Christ is the Lord. And interestingly enough, in 1 Timothy 2:6, the New Testament, we see the one having given himself as a ransom for all, same wording, the testimony in their own proper times. Victory and song is a common theme in the Bible. If we look at 2 Samuel 22:1, and David sang the song to the Lord on the day the Lord had delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. Job 36:24, remember to magnify his work. Remember to magnify his work, which the men have praised in song. And Psalms 106:12, then they believed his promises and sang his praise. There's many more verses than this, but you'll see it's quite common that when the Israelites would achieve victory or they'd be delivered by their Lord, they would sing. You also see the first prophetess. Most people are very aware of what a prophet is. They're not so aware of what a prophetess is. The Bible does have prophetess, female prophets. Exodus 15:19. Then Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with the tambourines and dancing, and Miriam sang to them. Now, what I thought was kind of interesting, which isn't necessarily going to strike a chord for everyone watching this on the internet, but for the people that are involved in the Sabbath study, notice that the first female prophetess, the women are with her holding tambourines. Well, we know from the Sabbath studies that Mr. Tambourine Man is a nickname for Satan. So we see the Byrds and Bob Dylan and Mr. Tambourine Man. We've got Mr. Tambourine Man, and then we have the prophetess, Mrs. Tambourine Woman. Overview of Exodus 15. Oops. My apologies, I'll have to fix this last slide. I think it's out of order. We'll fix that afterwards. So in Exodus 15, what we basically dealt with was the Song of Moses. It was a song that was basically illustrating the victory that Israel had over the Egyptians. And then we also saw the introduction of a female prophetess, which happens to be Aaron's wife. Aaron's wife was the first female prophetess that I noticed written in the Bible. She's not the only one. She's just the first one that I saw listed. And then, of course, the symbol she was holding was the tambourine. So the bonus content. Why did the Israelites leave and turn back? Why did the Lord tell them to turn back and go to Baal-zephon? Why wouldn't they just keep going towards Canaan? Exodus 14:1-3. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Pahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. You are to encamp by the sea directly opposite to Baal-zephon. For Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are wandering in the land in confusion. The wilderness has boxed them in.
Yahweh made it very clear that he was putting a literal smackdown on the gods of Egypt. Exodus 12:12, for I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. Do you think it was likely that God was telling Moses, tonight I'm going to go through and bust up all of these inanimate blocks of wood and stone? What would be the point? What do you think was it that gave the magicians of Pharaoh the power to turn their staffs into snakes? There were supernatural entities working for them. They're gods. And God said, tonight, when I go through the land, I will execute judgment on all of their gods. Now think about that. Think about all of the stuff that we hear about Egyptian gods. Our daughter learned about the Egyptian gods in mythology in school and thought that was so cool. Oh, Osiris and Horus and Isis and Ra and all of this is so cool. Yahweh kicked their tails. Now look at Exodus 14, and this part was the one that really got me, and I thought this was really, really awesome. Exodus 14. I had never heard this talked about in a study of the Red Sea crossing. Tell the people of Israel, God tells Moses, to turn back, and encamp in front of Pi-hahiroth between Migdol and the sea in front of Baal-zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea. Now, this begs a few questions. First of all, imagine being the last guy in the Israelite column and you looking back over your shoulder at the clouds of dust coming up from the chariot wheels, from the Egyptian army, the baddest military in the ancient Near East, and the word comes from the front of the column. Yahweh said, what? We got to turn around? Because that's what that phrase means. Turn back. Turn around. Turn around. I want you to go to this specific place, and you're going to camp all night. And I want you to camp facing Baal Zephon. Now, what is Baal Zephon? Why did God tell them to camp facing Baal Zephon? And what was Baal doing in Egypt? Baal was a Canaanite god, right? He was the king of their pantheon. El was the partly retired, chief god who just sort of let Baal do what he wanted. Baal was the king of the gods, a storm god. Oh, like Yahweh. Coincidence? But, and this is where the archaeologists and the historians know stuff that we should know in church. For a period of a couple hundred years called the Second Intermediate Period in Egyptian history, roughly 1750 to about 1550 BC, a group of Semitics called the Hyksos. The Hyksos ruled northern Egypt. Now this is a Hellenized or a Greek form of words that in Egypt or Egyptian meant rulers of foreign lands. They moved into the Nile Delta, northern Egypt, which for odd reasons is actually called Lower Egypt. That's because the Nile flows that way. Yeah. They took over, they settled in a city called Avaris. And they worshiped Baal. They brought their architecture with them. They brought their pottery with them. They brought their god with them. Baal was the chief god of northern Egypt for about 400 years. Now, this blew my mind finding out that there were Semitic people, possibly cousins, Canaanite anyway, in Egypt at the time of the sojourn, while the Israelites were in Egypt. In fact, during this period of history, there was an Egyptian king, a pharaoh, whose name was Jacob. Did you know that? Jacob. Technically, on his little scarab, it was Jacob Har. Har meaning mountain, Jacob of the mountain. Probably not that Jacob, but the point is there were Semitic people who controlled northern Egypt during this period. Now, we don't know if the Hyksos were still there when the Israelites left during the Exodus, but we know that they came, they brought their God, and their God stayed there for a long time. Also, and this is really interesting, Baal was identified with the Egyptian god Set, or Seth. Now, Set, we know today, or we think of him today, as the evil Egyptian god who got the drop on his brother Osiris and cut him up into 14 pieces. But he wasn't always a bad guy in the Egyptian pantheon. In the early days, Set was actually the assistant to the sun god Ra. He got up there on the solar boat every night before it went over the horizon because the evil serpent Apep was going to eat the solar boat if Set didn't stab him first. But later in Egyptian history, because Set was the god of storms, he was the god of the desert, he was the god of foreigners, and later in Egyptian history, after they'd been conquered by the Nubians and the Assyrians and the Persians, all within about 200 years, the god of the foreigners wasn't quite as welcome around the pyramids, if you know what I mean. But he was identified as one and the same as Baal. Baal, Set, same god. And his worship continued in northern Egypt for at least 400 years. And we know this because there was a stela set up by Ramses II, Ramses the Great. Yul Brynner. He set up this stela on the 400th anniversary of Set doing something. We're not sure what it was, but it's possible that if it's pointing back 400 years from the reign of Ramses the Great, it was around the year 1750 BC. So it could mark 400 years from the arrival in Egypt of the god Baal/Set. Just at the time the house of Israel shows up and settles there. Coincidence? Coincidence? No. I don't know about you, I'm not a coincidence theorist. No, I don't use that, no. Conspiracies, yes. Coincidences, no. And when Yahweh brings the Israelites out of Egypt, he orders them specifically to turn around and camp all night facing a place sacred to Baal Set, this place Baal Zephon, specifically so they could cross there. Did I mention that 500 miles north of the Nile Delta was a mountain called Mount Zephon? Any guess as to whose sacred mountain that was? Baal? Coincidence? No! This was a supernatural smackdown! Think about it. Yahweh said, turn around. I know you've got the baddest army in the Middle East coming after you. Don't worry. The angel of Yahweh, who by the way is what we Christians would call Jesus, will stand between you and them all night to protect you from them. But you're going to camp all night facing this place that's sacred to Baal and named for his holy mountain that's 500 miles away. Baal was the god of maritime navigation. In the Canaanite pantheon, the Canaanite mythology, Baal defeated the god Yam, who was the chaos god of the ocean. So Baal was the master of the sea, the master of the ocean, the master of maritime navigation. And Yahweh says, watch this. Wall of water on the right, wall of water on the left. Israelites walk through. This was a called shot like Babe Ruth in the 1935 World Series. Next one's over the center field fence. Baal, chief god of Canaan. That's my holy land, and my people are coming, and we're going to take it. And then just to put the cherry on the cake, all the Baal worshipers, Pharaoh's army, rush into the cut. Wall of water on the right, wall of water on the left. Our God's the master of the sea. He's got this. Boom. If there had been microphones in the 15th century BC, that's the moment where Yahweh would have just dropped the microphone on the stage. Boom. And walked off, because that was epic.
So the whole reason they turned around at Baal Zephon was because Baal Zephon had to do with Baal. And we've studied the Egyptian pharaohs, and we found that there were foreign pharaohs called the Hyksos that were actually pharaohs that came from the land of Canaan. And from the land of Canaan, it looks like they brought their god Baal with them. And so it just happens to be that on the same period of time when people were walking out, the Israelites were walking out on their exodus, that was the same time that they were actually celebrating this celebration to mark how many years Baal had actually been in Egypt. So at the same time, they go and they actually face opposing Baal Zephon. And keep in mind, they're going into the land of Canaan. And in the land of Canaan, Baal is the chief god. When you look at it, with the way the water is opened, it's almost like a birthing canal. They were actually being birthed into the land of Canaan.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Brothers and sisters, the sword is coming. If you hear the watchman's call, please repent and seek out Jesus Christ. There is still time. That at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow.